Hey guys, it's Katie here with Life the Mundane, and I'm here with my husband Mark.
Hi.
He has been on here before, but we're really excited to come and talk to you guys today about anxiety and depression. We've been talking about that a lot on this channel in the month of February, and we're going to kind of wrap up the series, at least for now, with just sort of a Q&A, asking him about his experience and what it's like being a spouse of someone who's going through this, and hopefully share some tips with you guys. So let's get started. Okay, so like I said, we're going to be kind of sharing our experience together and a lot from his perspective as far as what it was like helping me through my journey with anxiety and depression. If you guys want to see a little bit more of what that looked like as far as what my journey has been, you can check out the video above in the iCards or down in the description below. And I also recently shared a video of some strategies that I've used to help with anxiety and depression and deal with both the physical, emotional aspect as well as the spiritual aspect. So you guys can check that video out if you like as well. But jumping into what was it like, just how did it kind of, like, how did you notice? One question that people asked was, how did you notice that something was different or something was up?
I don't think I noticed it. When, like, I guess the worst of it kind of started, it was right after our fourth was born. She had a lot of medical needs. Katie was just exhausted all the time.
We were both running on fumes.
I was working overtime, working long days. She was having to manage all the medical stuff while I was at work. And so she was exhausted, which was understandable. She was running on fumes,
and we had 4 kids that were 3 and under. So we had a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old, and a newborn.
So I didn't notice anything at first, but one of the doctor's appointments that I actually was able to make, our family doctor looked at her and said, I think that you're struggling with anxiety and depression. Mm-hmm. And she had Katie talk it out a little bit, and this doctor was great because she just spent as long as you needed. And so she talked it out, and Katie was very anxious, nervous, not sure about taking medication, but we trusted the doctor, and so I just encouraged her. I was like, okay, look, this is what the doctor thinks. Let's try. Let's see what this does.
And I think something else, this is totally a side note, but something that doctor told me was that I was trying to keep a lot in my head. I'd always kept our family schedule, our calendar, the doctor's appointments, all of that in my head, but it had gotten infinitely more complicated to keep track of all of those things. And so it was causing more of a mental breakdown than even what was already going on. Yeah. And so she recommended, she was like, Katie, I'm going to tell you something and it's going to sound weird, but I want you to start writing things down. Be that your grocery list, your schedule, your to-do list, whatever thoughts you have, write it down and then forget it. Just completely forget it. And stop trying to keep it all in your head because it's making things a lot worse. And that actually, as silly and as simple as that sounds, that was huge. It took a little while for me to get used to it, of remembering that if I wrote it down, I didn't need to try to remember it. And to this day, if you ask me what's going on, I can now do like a week or 2 at a time. At that point, I couldn't do more than like the next hour. So she said, stop trying to keep track of your daughter's medical list, like of her diagnoses, of her surgeries, of her medication. Stop keeping track of that. Just put it down on paper and hand the doctors a paper when they ask you. And so I still do that to this day. I have a very detailed list. And I can hand that over very quickly, but that way I don't have to try and keep track of all the names and the exact dosages and all of that stuff. So that being said, that's just a really good helpful tip if it's something you guys are going through, is to just let it go. Stop trying to keep control of that, keep it all in your brain, and I promise that will give you some relief to some extent.
Well, and she actually uses this daily. She calls it brain dumping, and there will be nights where we'll go to bed and she's like, I'm awake, I'm restless, and it's okay. We'll get up, grab some paper, and just write it all down. Mm-hmm. And she takes 15 minutes, writes down whatever's going through her head.
And like totally random stuff, not related. And I just write it all down and then leave it till tomorrow until I can deal with it. And it helps a lot. And that's one of the ways that you've learned, getting back to the topic of this video, that's one of the ways that you've learned how to help me, I think, is by telling me when you see me being overwhelmed of going, you need to go brain out. All right, so another question that we got on Instagram was, did you ever struggle with feeling like my depression and anxiety was your fault, or struggle with a sense of guilt or trying to fix it?
Yes. Yes.
He's gotten better, but even sometimes he still tries to fix it.
I think it's natural to wonder if, did I cause this? Did I do something wrong? It took a while, and it took seeing that, well, I was not the cause of it. I contributed at certain points with certain activities.
Yeah, or was more, I wouldn't even say contributed as much as it triggered. Some of the actions that you did triggered some of my triggers, which if you saw my strategy video, I talked a lot about tracking your triggers, understanding what triggers you, and that way you can communicate that with your partner and stuff. But I think that was a tough one to figure out.
No, that was definitely tough, and honestly, like, I was able to, once I was able to realize kind of what triggered you, didn't mean I always got it right. I mean,
no.
Well, okay, an example. Early on, the kids were in kindergarten, about to go into first grade, and just all of our daughter's medical stuff was going on, and life was just difficult. And at that point in time, I looked at Katie and I said, I really think that, at least for the time being, we need to put the kids in school, which was heartbreaking to her. She felt like the worst parent ever. I can tell you that.
We were both homeschooled, and we had planned to homeschool from the beginning to end. Absolutely.
And I kind of insisted on that, and it was a really good thing for her.
Yeah, it was needed at that point.
At that point, we were in private school for 2 years, and it was the break that was needed, and we were able to come back. But what was good about that was she was struggling to just get out of bed in the morning, or just get dressed, and little things that can really help your day. Well, okay, I was at work. She had to get up and get the kids to school every day, which meant she had to get dressed. She had to do her hair. She had to at least minimally. Minimally. And so she had to get up. She had to get out of the house, which was great. It was super helpful. Well, about halfway through that, I was put on night shifts. So I went, I can help her. She can sleep in. I can come home from work first thing in the morning, get the kids breakfast, take them to school, and go to bed, and she can get up for the day. And that was the worst thing for her at the time, which we didn't realize for a couple of months. But we actually digressed, because what I was doing to try to help was helping her busyness, but not...
It was feeding that desire to just retract and not go out and not get out of bed and stuff. And I think on a practical side, your depression and anxiety, we are not saying that for everybody's situation that homeschooling is not an option. I have 100% homeschooled with anxiety and depression before and done it successfully. It's hard. And if you guys want to see a separate video on that, I'm not sure I'm going to do any more videos on this right this second, but if you guys want to see another video on that, drop it down in the comments and I can consider that for something in the future. But it definitely can be done. That being said, it was just that bad and it was just that severe, and life was that rough at that point because of all those medical things that was the best decision for us.
Okay, so, and another thing to be said about feeling like it is your fault. I'm not saying don't evaluate that or that is wrong. I think it is always, always, always a good stance to stop, look at what you are doing or what you have done that might be contributing to it. Also understand that usually, not always, but usually there are extenuating circumstances that are causing that or that are starting that. And that, and like I said earlier, not take it as I'm the worst person or I caused this. It's recognize or where you can help and try to adjust those things.
Yeah. And I think as somebody who's gone through it, understand too that your spouse who's going through the depression and anxiety may not be the best at communicating at that point in time. Because a lot of times, and again, we can only speak to our situation. I have struggled with varying levels of depression and anxiety, so that's helpful to some extent, but it's still only our experience, okay? And so I can't speak to everyone's out there, so please take that with a grain of salt. But I know sometimes it's very muddled, and it's hard to sort your thoughts out just for yourself, let alone to communicate that to someone else. So be patient, be understanding, understand that this is a marathon, not a sprint. Things are not going to be resolved overnight, no matter how good the communication is, no matter how severe or mild the situation is. It's not going to be handled overnight, and it's just got to be something that you patiently and prayerfully work on over time. And you may need to call in outside help, not just medication-wise or doctors-wise, but also outside help for counseling or talking to another couple that you trust to just help get some perspective if you're having trouble communicating during that time. So just want to put that out there too. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about, how to do the management. Like in my other strategy video, I talked about how to manage the day-to-day symptoms and keep it from controlling your life once you kind of get things on track. Medically and spiritually, how to maintain that. But we were asked on YouTube, what did you do when I was somewhat unapproachable, or like I couldn't just bounce back out of it? I mean, I was in the throes of it. How did you handle that? Or do you have any advice for anybody?
Okay. Well, early on, I handled it with, just sleep.
Yeah.
Just sleep, which wasn't helpful. And then for a period of time, I tried just pushing just get up, just go.
Go the opposite direction, yeah.
And that was at those really, really, really bad days where it's unapproachable. Neither of those approaches were helpful. What we've learned over many trial and errors is, just coming up, and when I realize that it's going to be a bad day, or when I realize that it's been a rough day, it's okay. If I'm home, it's okay. Rest, sleep for an hour. I'm going to come wake you up in an hour. Then I want you to get up and go take a shower. And then when the
always
shower,
timed.
And it's timed with an immediate follow-up activity that usually helps. So get up, go take a shower. Okay, your shower's done. I've already made breakfast. Come down, eat some breakfast, maybe sit with the family. If it's later in the day, it's oftentimes, hey, it looks like you might need a break. Do you want to go for a walk as a family or alone? You need to leave. You need to just go take 20, 30 minutes to yourself, just to regroup. I encourage her to pray, be in her Bible while she's off doing that time. When I'm at work, it's a little different. So it's because we have kids at home, we homeschool. Yeah. Parents have to be accessible and there. So it's talking her through just, get up, go, just talking her through the first steps of, you got to get up, go take a shower. For those days, the older kids know where the cereal is, they know where the bagels are, they know where the easy breakfast that mom doesn't have to make or the breakfast they know how to make.
They did a lot of Pop-Tarts at that age. At
the younger age, they did. We
that
had
was something they could do on their own.
Or it was something that they could bring the box to mom.
Yeah. Like back when it was at its worst, and it was just, like I said, we had younger kids. They were in school for part of that time. Before that, they didn't have anything they could do independently as far as schoolwork goes, but we could do audiobooks. We did do TV. Just get it out there. There was a lot of TV. And we tried at points to make it as wholesome TV as possible, but there was a lot of time that was just junk TV too, if we're being honest. I mean, not junk, but not edifying. Nothing bad, just not edifying. And there was a lot of that, and we were in survival mode 100%. And that was hard. It's hard for me to say that out loud and to admit that, but that was where we were at. I continually remind myself now as I look back on that time and I start to feel guilt, or I start to wonder if some of the reasons why my kids are struggling with certain areas in school now or whatever, when I start to beat myself up and wonder if something is my fault, I constantly remind myself that when we are weak, he is strong. And that I was at my weakest point, and there was no way, no how, that I could just pull myself up on my bootstraps and just do it. Like at that worst point. It hasn't been like that for years. But at that worst point, I couldn't just get better. And it was only by his grace that I am here today. And it is only by his grace and his work that my kids are actually excelling in school right now, that we were able to come back to homeschooling. So very much, I look back at it now, and instead of, I have to remind myself, it's not easy, but I have to remind myself to not buy into the lie of the guilt and the shame, and instead look at it as going, wow, look at what God's done. Look at where God's brought me from. Yeah. And to go, when you see me, to understand that it's glorious to God only. Yeah. So these strategies and systems help. They're good things to keep in mind, but understand that if you're in that situation, prayer is one of the best things you can do, being in the Word. Also understand from a spouse's perspective, when you, again, not for everybody, not in every situation, but when you are in the deep, deep throes of depression, you are oftentimes spiritually drowning. You oftentimes are very spiritually dry. You are needing a lifeline. Yeah. And you a lot of times struggle, or I oftentimes struggled with taking care of that myself. So I needed him, not in a patronizing way, but I needed him to spoon feed me a lot of stuff. So, encouraging me to pray was nice, but there were times where I couldn't pray in that particular situation. I just mentally was too foggy or whatever. So he would pray for me out loud. He would call me on the phone. I would be having a rough day, and he would pray over the phone with me. Maybe I was struggling to be in God's Word for devotion, so he would write the Bible out loud to me. So those are things like that. And just understand that being an encouragement spiritually is one of the best things you can do. Like if you do nothing else, or if you do everything else wrong, being a spiritual encouragement and leader in that is super helpful.
Yes, and that was another one that took me a much longer time to figure out than I wish it would have. That's one of the biggest helps that there's been, but it took a very long time for me to realize that was what was, well, one, needed, and two, just the best thing for her.
Yeah, that was helping.
Yes.
That was fixing things.
The days when she's just, if I can't get to her, if I can't just approach her even, the last thing I do is, our oldest son is a born helper and encourager. And when I can't help, when what I'm saying isn't working, what I'm doing isn't working, he always can get through to just encourage her, cheer her up. When I was at work and she would have a panic attack, he was immediately right there with.
And this is at age like 4.
Yeah,
3, 4 years old.
And for the last 5-6 years, he's just been able to come by, and he just understands how to be there and encourage. Mm-hmm.
He would come alongside me and say, "Mommy, it's okay. Just breathe, Mommy. It's okay. You've got this. You're going to do great." And just very, very encouraging. And he's still like that today. He's amazing. I struggled a lot with accepting that at first because, I don't know. It was just really hard.
It's hard. It's hard to be vulnerable in front of your children.
And it's really hard to think about what you're doing. So, you can't really control when you have panic attacks. And I would have panic attacks around the kids. And after a panic attack, if you're not familiar, it typically physically just drains you, like for a good portion of the day, if not the whole day. And I was having them like back to back, like multiple times a day, which was very overwhelming. And I did that in front of my kids, and I hate that. And I wish that I could go back and do things differently. But again, I know that God's going to use that for his glory, and he had a purpose and a reason for that. And who knows, maybe somebody in their life in the future is going to have struggles with this, and they're going to know what to do. Maybe it's, just for my sanctification. But no, I did that in front of our kids, and some rose up to that encouragement status, and they grew, I think, in being an encourager through that. But I have others who I think it maybe made them more anxious. They already have a tendency towards anxiety and anxiousness. Yeah. And there was probably a sense that made it worse. And I have to live with that, which is unfortunate. But again, when we have the bigger perspective in mind, and I say this right now, but I have to remind myself of this several times a day, that God has a plan for this, and he can use this for good. And I think about the trials and the trauma that I went through growing up, the different tough circumstances and situations, and I see how he used that to make me who I am today. And so I'm just praying that God will do the same for my children, that he will help me to use these as teaching opportunities. One thing that all of my kids have learned is how to handle a panic attack now properly, as well as my husband. This was like 5 years in that you figured this out. But if you guys aren't familiar with the grounding technique, so when somebody is having a panic attack, they can't breathe, they're having chest pains, it mimics, honestly, very similar to a heart attack.
You went to the hospital a couple
I
of
did
times.
for several times for it.
Yeah.
For chest pain, for the inability to breathe. I mean, literally cannot breathe, gasping, crying, can't talk, none of that. And so when you do this grounding exercise, essentially it is asking that person and saying, what is something that you can hear? What is something that you can taste? One at a time. Let them answer and then ask them the next time. What is something you can taste? What is something you can touch? But going through all 5 senses and helping ground them in the reality that they are in. And it works really quickly, honestly. He was kind of like, where was this? For years.
It grounds you in the reality you're in, and it brings you, it brings your focus onto something other than
your
problem or the fact that you're having a panic attack.
Yeah.
I mean, that there were times where one would start and you would realize it was starting, which would just
add more anxiety.
More anxiety, which would make it 5 times worse.
Mm-hmm.
So she can tell early on now, most of the time, if it's been a day where it's very possible. And so that just kind of puts me on alert of, okay, I need to be helping to reduce as much stress or be ready to take care of the kids. Because one of the worst things you can do is to go and try to give a hug to someone who's having a panic attack.
They don't want to be touched.
They don't want to be touched.
Definitely been learned, guys, over years and years of different situations that have come up. And so this is not an overnight thing. So have grace with both people in the relationship, with the person who's going through it and the person that's trying to support it, and understand you're not going to get it right the first time, and that's okay. I think one other thing that we wanted to address, issue of how can you sort of start to support. We've talked about spiritually leading them, and we've talked about some other things, to do and don't. But I think one is like when, especially home maintenance stuff, home management or personal care, hygiene, stuff like that becomes an issue, which is very common with depression, especially in the more serious stages of that. What do you do? How can you approach that without, stepping on the landmine? So I wanted you to share what you kind of have discovered over the years.
Okay, well, so for us, the 2 that came up the most often was the dishes and the laundry. I'm not saying that nothing else was
there's other things that fell apart.
But I'd say that the 2 that came up the most often were the dishes and the laundry. But those were also the 2 things that if she was already feeling guilty, I wouldn't even say, I wouldn't say, why didn't you do this? I wouldn't even say, can you do this? It would be I'm out of clean shirts for work.
And that, I just
and it was even just me talking out loud of, this needs to get done. It wasn't even directed at her. I'm not saying I never directed a request to her, or at her, but, to her. But there were times where, we don't have clean cups right now. We need to, and sometimes that was enough to put her into a deeper depression or even cause a panic attack. And so, for a while, what I started to do is, I'll just do it. I'll just do it all. And that leads to very quick burnout.
Yeah, and resentment.
And that leads very quickly on a path towards resentment and frustration, and that is not healthy. I'm not saying don't help.
Yeah, definitely help.
Don't take over.
But yeah, taking over. And it also enabled me. Again, it was that, okay, again, you have to understand that when you're going through this, especially when there is a mental, physical aspect to it, and which there isn't always, it just depends on the situation, but especially when there's times when it's more severe and you need medication, it is, it's not rational, guys. There is a chemical imbalance in the brain. There is spiritual issues. There is other things that we've addressed in the other videos, but there's also something that's kind of irrational to it. So I want you to understand that I can look back now and try to piece together what I was thinking or what I was going through, but I don't remember a lot of that stuff. And so it's kind of hard to speak from that perspective, but I do know that enabled me of thinking like, okay, I feel guilty, but this is a way it can get done. And so that was not healthy for him to take over and do it all. But some of the things we did were...
Okay. So a lot of times it's, the dishes need to be done. It's, hey, I'm going to start the dishes. I'd love to spend some time with you. Why don't you come in the kitchen and just hang out with me. Just join me. And that's in the worst case scenario. But just get her in the room with me while I'm doing it.
Yeah, and if I was in there, I would typically jump in to help.
Oftentimes, if both like dishes and laundry needed to be done, it was, hey, we both hate the dishes equally.
Yeah, we do.
We both hate. So usually it would be me going, okay, how bad is it? Do I need to do the dishes, or can I say, hey, why don't you do the dishes and I'll go do the laundry? But it's take one and ask them to do the other. Okay, these both need to be done. I'm not asking you to do them all, but can you take one of them?
Yeah, and again, I would say you want to make sure you're never patronizing. I mean, they're already usually dealing with a lot of guilt and a lot of, especially as moms, as women, we're usually dealing with a lot of guilt and a lot of stress. So you don't want to make it feel like you're talking down to the person, but you do have to understand that sometimes in these situations, it is a little bit more like parenting than it is like a spouse to spouse. Okay. And that's okay for a period of time to kind of rebuild and get back on your feet, but you don't want to live in that tension because that's not healthy, to feel like one is taking responsibility for or is parenting the other one. But there was a sense of, there were times where kind of like when you talk to a really stubborn 2-year-old or emotionally fragile teenager and you need to offer options and say, okay, we are going to do something, but would you rather do this or would you rather do this? Kind of like that. Just having that choice helped a little bit. So just sort of wrap it up, what is one thing that you would say? If you could say anything to a spouse that's dealing with this, what would you say?
Constantly be praying for them. Tell them that you're praying for them. I can't tell you how important it was for her to hear, hey, I've been thinking about you today. I'm praying for you.
Yeah. And I think also reminding me of those spiritual truths a lot. I mean, really, you had to be my truth teller and go, I would be like, oh, I'm doing horribly. I told you in my other video that I let that lie get into my head and I meditated on it day and night, and I'm not kidding. For a very short period of time, I meditated on that thought that I was a bad mom, and I wasn't before that. But when I started meditating and focusing on that as my truth, it started to become true eventually. And so I was really thankful that he was able to step up. We had friends and family members that were able to jump in and help. And it was for a very short period of time that really, really intense depression and anxiety was. But I have struggled with anxiety on and off for years now. And all of these things still apply and are helpful, but some have to be used in more of those serious worst case scenario kind of things. And some of them have to be used just in day to day. But I think that the big thing is to remember that you might have to be the one who is saying, you are loved, you are important. You are important not because you're important to me, but you're important because you're made in God's image. And because when you say you're important, I think the thing again about it is the distortion of truth in your mind when you're going through anxiety and depression. Saying that he found me attractive or saying that he loved me, I could come up with, in my distorted mind, I could come up with a million reasons why that should not be the case. And so that was a lot of, I could fight that. I could argue with that a lot.
Or even just the lie of, well, you're my spouse, you have to say that.
You have to say that, yeah. And so coming to me instead and saying, I love you, but even more than I love you, God loves you. And he loves you because you're created in his image. And guess what? God can do good work here. And guess what? In your weakness, he is strong, and he is faithful to finish the work that he has started. And to just remind me of those verses and to just keep me accountable to God's truth, it's really hard to argue with that.
Yeah.
Very hard to argue with that. And it did. It resonated with me. And then ultimately that's, one of the many things that really helped get me out of that.
One thing that we did do is when she wasn't struggling with it, we sat down and said, okay, what was helpful?
Yeah.
What wasn't? And there were a few times she looked at me and said, that was the worst thing. Stop.
But I liked it in the moment. That's the thing, is a lot of times the worst thing you could do was not the things that annoyed me. They were actually the things I was begging and pleading for.
Usually the ones that annoyed you were the ones you needed.
Yeah. And so sometimes you have to understand that unfortunately sometimes you're going to have to be the bad guy. Do it in love, do it with graciousness, but understand that they're not always going to like what you're telling them or what you're doing. Try to find ways to not be patronizing, like I said, but understand that this is what's best for them. Just like with our children, sometimes we tell them, you need to eat your broccoli, you need to do your chores, and they get frustrated and they're upset. And we need to come alongside them and be like, okay, I know this is hard, but God's called us to do work and we need to do this, and like come alongside them. Same thing with your spouse. In these situations, there are going to be times where you need to come along and say, I know you don't want to get up right now and you don't want to go take a shower. You don't want to get up and go outside, but you need to, okay? I'll come right alongside you and do it with you. You're not alone. You're not alone in this. We're all here for you. We're all rooting for you, but you need to understand that you're not alone in this and that we have to do this right now. If you are not in a season of anxiety, again, whether you ever deal with anxiety or depression, we as Christians know that we're all going to go through trials. We're all going to go through tribulations. God says that in his word. When you face trials of various kinds, not if you face trials, when you face trials of various kinds, James says. And so I think that we can prepare for that. I think not letting that catch us off guard and realizing that it's going to happen. So in the seasons when everything is good, don't worry about the future, but prepare for the future and go, okay, let's talk about in this situation, what could work, what could not. Mm-hmm. Let's write notes to ourselves of truth. Let's look up verses about what the truth is and keep that nearby in case we need that. And so anyways, I don't know, just hopefully that's helpful to you guys. Yeah. I really don't know if there are other things you guys want to know. Again, feel free to drop it down in the comments below. And we can talk about that and get back with you guys on that. But I really appreciate you guys submitting your questions. It's been really amazing to see the outpouring of love and of stories that have come out. I've had Instagram and Facebook and here on YouTube that people have messaged me, letting me know what their personal struggles were and how they're happy to hear somebody else talking about it. So that's just my hope with all of this, is that God would get the glory from where I've been to where I've come, and that you would realize that you are not alone. Mm-hmm. So if there's any way we can be praying for you guys, let us know, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Bye.